Once upon a time, in a kingdom where the rivers sang lullabies and the mountains stood like wise old guardians, there lived a king named Aldric. He was not the sort of king one might imagine, with a crown heavy with jewels or a throne carved from gold. No, Aldric was a gentle soul, his hair silvered like moonlight on water, his eyes deep and warm like the embers of a hearth long tended. His castle rested in the valley of Lirien, a place cradled by soft hills and blanketed with meadows of wildflowers that glowed faintly under the stars. The castle itself was modest, its stones weathered but cozy, draped in moss and warmed by fires that flickered in every room. Aldric had ruled for many years, not with a stern hand, but with a quiet kindness that made his people love him. Yet beneath his calm smile lay a secret sorrow, for the king carried a burden no one knew, a promise unfulfilled, tied to a magic older than the kingdom itself. The valley of Lirien was a land of peace, its days filled with the hum of bees tending clover and the laughter of children chasing butterflies that shimmered like stained glass. The people lived simply, their homes dotted along the riverbanks, roofs thatched with straw and windows framed with painted shutters. They wove tales of the valley's beginning, how it had once been a barren place until a great star fell from the sky, burying itself deep in the earth and bringing life to the land. That star, they said, still slept beneath the valley, its light pulsing faintly, keeping the seasons gentle and the harvests bountiful. But as the years passed, the elders began to whisper that the star's glow was fading, that the flowers bloomed less brightly, and the river's song grew softer. Aldric heard these murmurs and felt them settle in his chest like a stone, for he knew the truth. The star's magic was tied to his family, and he alone held the key to its renewal, a key he had lost long ago. One crisp autumn evening, as the sky draped itself in shades of amber and rose, Aldric stood on his balcony, gazing out over the valley. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, and the distant bleating of sheep floated up from the hills. He wore a simple cloak of deep green, its edges frayed from years of wear, and his hands rested lightly on the stone railing. The king was lost in thought, remembering a night from his youth when his mother, the queen before him, had pressed a small star-shaped pendant into his palm. She had told him it was the heart of Lirien, a fragment of the fallen star, and that he must guard it always. But in his carefree days, he had misplaced it during a hunt in the Frostwood, a tangled forest beyond the valley's edge, and though he searched for weeks, it was never found. Now, with the valley's magic waning, Aldric felt the weight of that loss more than ever, a quiet ache that kept him awake long after the castle grew still. As the last light faded from the sky, a flutter of wings broke the silence, and a small bird landed on the railing beside him. It was a sparrow, its feathers dusted with silver, its eyes bright and knowing. The bird tilted its head, studying the king, and though it did not speak, Aldric felt a stirring in his soul, as if it carried a message meant only for him. He watched as the sparrow hopped closer, then took flight, circling once before darting toward the Frostwood, its silhouette vanishing into the shadows. The king's heart quickened, for the Frostwood was a place few dared to tread, its trees gnarled and its paths shrouded in mist. Yet something in the bird's gaze had felt like an invitation, a nudge toward the past he had tried to forget. He lingered on the balcony, the cool breeze brushing his face, and decided then that the time had come to face what he had lost. With the valley's light dimming and his people's hope resting on him, Aldric knew he must journey into the Frostwood to find the pendant, or something greater still. And so, beneath a sky sprinkled with stars, the king's tale began to unfold, a soft and wondrous adventure laced with courage and the promise of a magic rekindled. The morning after the sparrow's visit dawned soft and golden, with a mist curling gently over the valley of Lirien like a blanket tucked around a sleeping child. King Aldric rose early, his breath visible in the cool air as he stood by his window, watching the sun spill its light across the meadows. The castle was quiet, save for the distant clatter of pots as the kitchen stirred to life, and the king felt a stillness settle over him, a calm resolve that had been missing for too long. He dressed in his simplest garb, a tunic of earthy brown and his familiar green cloak, leaving his crown behind on its velvet cushion. Today he was not a king of pomp and ceremony, but a man seeking something lost, guided by a flicker of hope and the memory of a bird's bright eyes. Before the castle woke fully, he slipped out through a side door, his boots brushing the dew-kissed grass as he made his way toward the Frostwood, the valley whispering its farewell in the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the river. The journey to the Frostwood was not long, but it felt like stepping into another world. The meadows gave way to hills that grew steeper and wilder, their slopes dotted with gnarled roots and stones smoothed by time. As Aldric approached the forest's edge, the air grew cooler, tinged with the scent of pine and something older, something sharp and mysterious, like the breath of the earth itself. The trees loomed tall and twisted, their branches weaving a canopy so thick that only slivers of sunlight slipped through, dappling the ground in shifting patterns. The mist hung heavier here, drifting between the trunks like a living thing, and the sounds of the valley faded, replaced by a hush that seemed to listen as much as it spoke. Aldric paused at the threshold, his hand resting on the rough bark of an ancient oak, and felt a shiver of memory. This was where he had last seen the pendant, all those years ago, glinting in the undergrowth before it vanished into the shadows. He stepped into the Frostwood, his footsteps muffled by a carpet of moss and fallen needles, and the forest seemed to close around him, gentle yet watchful. The deeper he went, the stranger it became. Vines curled upward as if reaching for something unseen, and faint glimmers danced in the corners of his vision, like stars caught in the mist. He walked for hours, guided only by instinct and the occasional flutter of wings overhead, the silver-dusted sparrow appearing now and then to lead him onward. At last, he came to a clearing where the mist parted, revealing a pond so still it mirrored the sky perfectly, its surface unbroken save for the ripple of a single falling leaf. Beside the pond stood a figure, slight and cloaked in gray, her hood shadowing her face. She was old, her hands gnarled like the roots of the trees, and she tended a small fire that burned without smoke, its flames a soft violet that cast a glow across the clearing. Aldric approached slowly, his heart thumping with a mix of wonder and caution, and the figure turned her head slightly, as if she had been expecting him all along. The old woman did not speak at first, but beckoned him closer with a tilt of her hand, and Aldric felt drawn to her, as if she held a piece of the puzzle he sought. He settled on a mossy stone by the fire, its warmth seeping into his bones, and watched as she stirred a pot of something that smelled of herbs and earth. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like the turning of seasons, and when she finally lifted her eyes to his, they shone with a light that reminded him of the pendant, bright and ancient, full of secrets. She reached into her cloak and drew forth a small woven pouch, placing it on the ground between them. From it spilled a handful of silver feathers, each shimmering faintly, and Aldric's breath caught as he recognized the same silver dust that coated the sparrow's wings. The woman's gaze held his, steady and kind, and though no words passed between them, he understood that she was a keeper of the Frostwood's mysteries, a guardian of the magic he had come to reclaim. The fire crackled softly, the pond reflected the first stars of evening, and Aldric felt the weight of his journey shift. Whatever lay ahead, he was no longer alone in it. Night settled over the Frostwood like a soft quilt, the stars peeking through the tangled branches as if curious about the scene below. King Aldric sat by the violet fire, its glow painting the clearing in hues of lavender and dusk, while the old woman tended her pot with a rhythm as steady as a lullaby. The air was cool but gentle, carrying the scent of the simmering herbs, sage and thyme woven with something sweeter, like the memory of blooming honeysuckle. The silver feathers lay scattered between them, glinting faintly, and Aldric felt their presence tugging at his heart, whispering of the pendant he had lost so long ago. The old woman's silence was not cold or distant, but warm, like the quiet of a friend who knows words are not always needed. She stirred her brew once more, then dipped a wooden ladle into the pot, offering him a steaming cup. He took it with a nod of thanks, the warmth seeping into his hands, and as he sipped the earthy tea, a calm washed over him, loosening the knots of worry that had tied themselves around his soul. The woman settled onto a low stump across from him, her gray cloak blending with the shadows, and at last she spoke, her voice a soft murmur, like wind through dry leaves. She told him she was called Mara, a weaver of the Frostwood's threads, tasked with guarding the echoes of the valley's magic. Long ago, she said, the star that fell into Lirien had not only brought life to the land but had bound itself to the hearts of those who ruled it, Aldric's family. The pendant his mother gave him was no mere trinket, but a shard of that star, a key to keeping its light alive. When he lost it, the star's glow began to fade, and with it, the valley's strength. Mara's eyes softened as she spoke, and Aldric felt a pang of guilt, though her tone held no blame, only a quiet understanding that he had been young, untested by the weight of such a charge. She reached into the pouch again, drawing out a single thread of silver light, thin as a spider's silk, and let it drift upward, where it hung in the air, shimmering like a guide. Mara explained that the pendant had not been lost forever, but had fallen into the keeping of the Frostwood's deepest guardians, creatures of shadow and light who moved unseen among the trees. They were not cruel, she assured him, but they were cautious, hiding the star shard from those who might misuse its power. To reclaim it, Aldric would need to prove his heart, not with strength or cunning, but with the kindness that had always defined him. She pointed toward the pond, where the mist had begun to swirl, forming shapes that danced across the water's surface, figures of deer with antlers aglow, foxes with tails of flame, and birds that trailed stardust in their wake. These were the guardians, she said, and they watched him even now, waiting to see if he was worthy. The silver thread floated toward the pond, then stretched beyond it, disappearing into the darkened woods, and Mara nodded gently, her meaning clear. His path lay ahead, deeper into the forest's heart. Aldric finished his tea, the warmth lingering in his chest, and rose to his feet, his cloak brushing the mossy ground. He felt no fear, only a quiet certainty that this was where he was meant to be. Mara offered him a small gift before he left, a lantern carved from a hollow gourd, its sides pierced with star-shaped holes, and inside, a single violet flame that flickered without fuel. It would light his way, she said, and keep the shadows kind. He thanked her with a bow, his silver hair catching the firelight, and turned toward the path the thread had marked. The sparrow appeared again, its wings a blur of silver as it darted ahead, and Aldric followed, stepping beyond the clearing into the thickening woods. The mist parted for him, the trees seemed to lean closer, and the air hummed with a melody too soft to name. Behind him, Mara watched until he vanished from sight, her hands resting in her lap, a faint smile curving her lips as the fire burned on, steady and sure, a beacon in the gentle dark of the Frostwood. The Frostwood deepened as King Aldric walked onward, the glow of Mara's lantern casting a constellation of tiny stars across the path before him. The violet flame flickered softly, its light warm and steady, painting the gnarled trees in shades of twilight and soothing the shadows that stretched long and quiet around him. The silver thread shimmered ahead, a delicate guide weaving through the undergrowth, and the sparrow flitted from branch to branch, its silver-dusted wings catching the lantern's glow like a sprinkle of moonlight. The air grew thicker here, laced with the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of unseen flowers, and the sounds of the forest softened to a hush, a rustle of leaves, a sigh of wind, the distant trickle of a hidden stream. Aldric's steps were slow and careful, his boots sinking into the mossy ground, and though the woods felt vast and wild, there was a coziness to it, as if the trees themselves were old friends leaning in to share a secret. As he journeyed deeper, the forest began to shift, its shapes growing stranger and more wondrous. Roots twisted upward into arches, forming tunnels draped with vines that glowed faintly, like threads of captured starlight. Mushrooms sprouted in clusters, their caps speckled with luminescent spots that pulsed in time with some unheard rhythm. Aldric paused beneath one of the arches, his lantern held high, and watched as a family of hedgehogs trundled past, their spines tipped with tiny orbs of light that bobbed like fireflies. The sparrow chirped once, a sound as gentle as a lullaby, and led him through the tunnel into a grove where the air shimmered with a silvery haze. Here the trees parted to reveal a circle of stones, each one smooth and pale, etched with runes that glowed softly under the mist. In the center stood a figure, a stag, its antlers branching wide and luminous, its coat a deep gray flecked with silver, like the sky before dawn. The stag turned its head toward Aldric, its eyes deep and calm, and though it did not move, the king felt a presence wash over him, a quiet strength, ancient and kind, that seemed to see into his very soul. He lowered the lantern slightly, his breath catching, and the silver thread floated upward, circling the stag before settling at its hooves. This was one of the guardians Mara had spoken of, he knew, a keeper of the Frostwood's magic, and its gaze held a question Aldric could not yet answer. He stepped closer, his cloak brushing the stones, and the stag dipped its head, as if in greeting, before turning to walk away, its steps silent on the moss. The thread followed, and Aldric did too, drawn by a pull he could not name, a sense that this creature held a piece of the path he sought. The grove faded behind him as he trailed the stag through winding paths and over bridges of woven roots, the lantern's light dancing across the forest floor. At last, they reached a hollow where the trees grew tall and close, their branches forming a ceiling that let only slivers of starlight through. The stag stopped by a pool of water, its surface dark and still, reflecting the antlers' glow like a mirror of the sky. It lowered its head to drink, and as it did, the water rippled, revealing an image, a glimpse of the pendant, its star-shaped form nestled in a bed of silver moss, guarded by shadows that moved like living things. Aldric's heart lifted at the sight, but the vision faded quickly, leaving the pool dark once more. The stag raised its eyes to his, and he understood, the pendant was near, but not yet his to take. The guardian stepped back, its form blending into the mist, and in its place appeared a small wooden box, simple and unadorned, resting by the pool's edge. Aldric knelt to lift it, his fingers brushing the smooth wood, and felt a warmth within, a hint of the magic he had come to find. The sparrow landed beside him, its wings folding neatly, and the night grew still, wrapping the hollow in a gentle embrace as Aldric held the box close, knowing his journey was far from over. The hollow where King Aldric stood shimmered faintly in the glow of his lantern, the violet flame casting a soft halo around the wooden box in his hands. The pool beside him lay still once more, its dark surface reflecting the slivers of starlight that slipped through the woven branches above, and the air held a quiet expectancy, as if the Frostwood itself waited to see what he would do next. The sparrow perched on a low root, its silver feathers ruffled gently by a breeze that carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Aldric traced the smooth edges of the box with his fingertips, feeling its warmth pulse faintly, like a heartbeat tucked within the wood. He knew it was no ordinary gift from the stag. It was a test, a step toward the pendant he sought, and though he longed to open it, a whisper of caution stayed his hand. The forest was kind, but its magic was deep and layered, and he sensed that patience would serve him better than haste. He settled onto the mossy ground, resting the box in his lap, and let the lantern's light spill over it, revealing faint carvings of leaves and stars etched into its surface. The sparrow hopped closer, tilting its head as if to encourage him, and Aldric felt a swell of gratitude for its steady presence. The night deepened around him, the trees swaying softly, their branches humming a melody that wove into his thoughts, calming the flicker of doubt that lingered there. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool, earthy air, and let his mind drift back to the valley of Lirien, to the wild flowers that nodded in the breeze, the river that sang through the meadows, and the people who trusted him to keep their home alive. That trust steadied him, and when he opened his eyes again, he knew he was ready to face whatever lay within the box, guided by the kindness that had brought him this far. With a gentle touch, he lifted the lid, and a soft glow spilled out, bathing the hollow in a silver light that felt like the first breath of dawn. Inside rested a single feather, larger than the sparrows, its quill shimmering with a radiance that pulsed in time with the lantern's flame. It was beautiful, delicate yet strong, and as Aldric lifted it carefully between his fingers, the air around him stirred, the mist swirling into shapes that danced like memories. He saw flashes of the pendant, its star-shaped form glinting in sunlight, then resting in shadows, then glowing faintly in a cavern beneath the earth. The visions faded as quickly as they came, but they left him with a certainty. The feather was a key, not to the pendant itself, but to the next guardian who held it. The sparrow chirped softly, its wings fluttering, and Aldric smiled, tucking the feather into his cloak, its warmth settling against his chest like a promise. As he rose to his feet, the hollow trembled faintly, and the pool rippled once more, its surface parting to reveal a path of stepping stones that led into the mist. The sparrow took flight, darting across the stones, and Aldric followed, the box cradled under one arm, the lantern swinging gently in his hand. The stones were cool beneath his boots, slick with dew, but they held firm, guiding him through the thickening fog until the trees parted to reveal a new place, a glade bathed in moonlight, its grass silvered and soft, dotted with flowers that glowed like tiny lanterns. In the center stood a fox, its fur a deep amber streaked with flame, its eyes bright and knowing. It watched him approach, its tail curling like a plume of fire, and Aldric felt the feather in his cloak hum faintly, as if it recognized this guardian. The fox tilted its head, its gaze warm but searching, and the king stopped a few paces away, his heart steady with a quiet hope. The glade seemed to hold its breath, the flowers dimming slightly, and Aldric knew this was another moment of proving, a chance to show the goodness that Mara had seen in him, the light that Lirien needed. The night wrapped them in its gentle embrace, and the journey continued, step by soft step, toward the heart of the Frostwood's magic. The glade where King Aldric stood shimmered under the moonlight, its silvered grass swaying as if brushed by an unseen hand, and the tiny glowing flowers cast a gentle radiance that mingled with the violet glow of his lantern. The fox before him sat poised and still, its amber fur flickering like a flame caught in a breeze, its eyes deep and luminous, holding a wisdom that seemed to stretch beyond the edges of the Frostwood. The feather tucked within Aldric's cloak pulsed softly, a warm hum against his chest, and he felt its connection to this guardian, a thread of magic linking them across the quiet night. The sparrow settled on a low branch nearby, its silver wings folded neatly, watching with a calm expectancy that steadied the king's nerves. The air was cool and sweet, scented with the faint perfume of the glowing blossoms, and the silence of the glade wrapped around him like a shawl, soft and comforting, urging him to listen rather than speak. Aldric took a step closer, his boots sinking into the plush grass, and the fox tilted its head, its fiery tail curling tighter as if in thought. He felt no threat in its gaze, only a gentle curiosity, a question woven into the light of its eyes. The king lowered the lantern to the ground, letting its stars spill across the glade, and reached into his cloak to draw out the feather. Its silver glow brightened as he held it aloft, catching the moonlight in a dance of shimmering hues, and the fox's ears flicked forward, a spark of recognition passing through its expression. Aldric knelt slowly, resting the feather on the grass between them, an offering of trust rather than demand, and the glade seemed to sigh, the flowers glowing a little brighter, their light weaving a delicate tapestry around the scene. The fox rose to its paws, its movements fluid and graceful, and circled the feather once, its tail brushing the ground with a trail of faint embers that faded into the earth. The guardian stopped before him, its eyes meeting his, and Aldric felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of being seen, not as a king with a crown, but as a man with a heart that ached for his valley. The fox lowered its head, nudging the feather back toward him with its nose, and as Aldric took it once more, the glade trembled faintly, the air thrumming with a melody too soft to hear. The grass parted at the fox's feet, revealing a small stone tablet, smooth and pale, etched with a single rune that glowed like molten silver. The fox stepped back, its gaze steady, and Aldric reached for the tablet, his fingers brushing its cool surface. It was light in his hand, almost weightless, and as he held it, the rune pulsed once, then faded, leaving behind a whisper of understanding. This was a mark of passage, a sign that he had earned the fox's trust, a step closer to the pendant that held Lirien's light. The fox turned then, its tail sweeping the air, and began to pad toward the edge of the glade, where the trees grew dense and dark once more. The sparrow took flight, following with a flutter of wings, and Aldric gathered his lantern and the wooden box, the tablet tucked safely within his cloak beside the feather. He followed the fox through the undergrowth, the path winding past streams that glittered under the stars and hollows where owls hooted softly, their eyes gleaming like lanterns of their own. At last, they reached a rise where the trees thinned, revealing a cliff that overlooked a vast cavern below, its depths shrouded in mist and lit by a faint silvery glow. The fox paused at the edge, its fur rippling in the breeze, and looked back at Aldric with a nod, as if to say this was where their paths parted. The king gazed into the cavern, his heart lifting at the sight of that distant light, and felt the feather and tablet hum in unison, urging him downward. The fox slipped away into the shadows, its embers fading into the night, and Aldric stood alone with the sparrow, the lantern's glow a quiet companion as he prepared to descend, drawn ever closer to the magic that awaited him. The cliff's edge where King Aldric stood glowed faintly under the starlight, the mist rising from the cavern below curling around his boots like a gentle tide. The lantern in his hand cast its violet stars across the stone, mingling with the silvery shimmer that pulsed from the depths, and the sparrow perched beside him, its wings tucked close, its eyes bright with a quiet encouragement. The feather and the tablet rested warm within his cloak, their hum a steady rhythm that matched the beat of his heart, and the wooden box felt solid under his arm, a reminder of the journey that had brought him here. The air was crisp, scented with the cool dampness of the cavern and the faint tang of moss, and the night wrapped the Frostwood in a hush that felt both vast and intimate, like a storyteller pausing before the tale's final turn. Aldric took a deep breath, his silver hair stirring in the breeze, and stepped toward the narrow path that wound down the cliffside, its stones worn smooth by time and softened with patches of lichen. The descent was slow and careful, the lantern's light guiding his steps as the path twisted through jutting rocks and roots that clung to the cliff like old friends holding hands. The mist thickened as he went, swirling around him in soft eddies, and the glow from below grew brighter, painting the walls in shades of silver and pearl. The sparrow flitted ahead, its wings cutting through the fog, and Aldric felt a quiet wonder settle over him. This cavern was no ordinary place, but a chamber of the Frostwood's deepest magic, a sanctuary where the valley's light had taken root. At last, the path leveled into a wide ledge, and he stepped into the cavern proper, his breath catching at the sight before him. The space was vast yet cozy, its ceiling arched with stalactites that glittered like frozen stars, its floor carpeted with silver moss that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. In the center lay a pool, its water clear and luminous, and above it floated the pendant, his pendant, its star-shaped form radiating a gentle light that bathed the cavern in warmth. Aldric approached slowly, the moss soft beneath his boots, and felt the feather and tablet stir within his cloak, their hum rising to a soft song. The pendant hung suspended in the air, surrounded by shadows that moved like wisps of smoke, guardians of the star shard, their forms fluid and ever-changing, eyes glinting within the darkness. They did not advance, but watched him with a stillness that felt like a final test, and Aldric understood that this was the moment Mara had prepared him for, the chance to prove his heart one last time. He set the lantern down, its light blending with the pendant's glow, and opened the wooden box, placing the feather and the tablet beside it on the moss. The shadows shifted, their eyes narrowing, and Aldric knelt before the pool, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his voice a murmur as he spoke to them, not with words of command, but with the quiet truth of his purpose. He told them of Lirien, of the fading flowers and the softening river, of the people who looked to him, and of the promise he had failed to keep until now. The shadows listened, their forms softening, and the pendant's light flared briefly, as if responding to his words. One by one, the guardians drifted closer, their eyes no longer wary but warm, and they circled him once before dissolving into the mist, leaving the pendant unguarded. Aldric reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and the star shard settled into his palm, its warmth familiar and alive. A piece of the valley's heart returned to him at last. The cavern sighed, the moss pulsed brighter, and the pool rippled with a melody that echoed through the stones. The sparrow landed beside him, chirping softly, and Aldric smiled, tears pricking his eyes as he held the pendant close, its light seeping into him like a long-forgotten embrace. The journey was not yet over. He had to bring this light back to Lirien, but for now he rested in the cavern's glow, the night cradling him gently as the magic of the Frostwood hummed around him, a promise of renewal waiting to bloom. The cavern's glow lingered around King Aldric as he rose to his feet, the pendant clasped gently in his hand, its light pulsing like a heartbeat against his skin. The silver moss beneath him shimmered with renewed life, and the pool's melody wove through the air, a soft farewell from the Frostwood's heart. The sparrow fluttered to his shoulder, its silver feathers brushing his cheek, and the lantern's violet flame flickered as if in quiet celebration. The shadows had vanished, their trust given freely, and the cavern felt lighter now, its stalactites catching the pendant's glow like stars plucked from the sky. Aldric tucked the star shard into his cloak, beside the feather and the tablet, and lifted the wooden box, its warmth a steady comfort as he turned back toward the ledge. The mist parted for him, the path up the cliffside clear and welcoming, and with each step, he felt the weight of his journey lift, replaced by a gentle hope that warmed him like the first rays of dawn. The ascent was easier than the descent, the stones firm beneath his boots, and the sparrows' soft chirps guided him upward through the swirling fog. As he reached the cliff's edge, the night sky opened wide above him, stars twinkling brighter than before, as if they too sensed the pendant's return. The frostwood stretched out around him, its trees swaying in a breeze that carried the scent of pine and blooming night flowers, and Aldric paused to breathe it in, his silver hair catching the moonlight. The path home unfolded before him, winding through the forest's familiar hollows and glades, and though the hour was late, he felt no weariness, only a quiet eagerness to bring the light back to Lirien. The sparrow took flight, leading the way, and Aldric followed, the lantern swinging gently at his side, its stars dancing across the mossy ground as the woods seemed to hum with a melody of welcome. By the time he emerged from the frostwood, the eastern sky was softening with the promise of morning, a blush of pink and gold threading through the stars. The valley of Lirien lay before him, its hills rolling gently under a blanket of dew, and Aldric's heart swelled at the sight, home waiting for him, its beauty still soft despite the fading magic. He crossed the meadows, the wild flowers brushing his cloak, and as he neared the castle, the first rays of sunlight spilled over the horizon, casting long shadows that danced with the dawn. The people of the valley were stirring, their voices drifting on the wind as they tended their gardens and flocks, and Aldric knew the moment had come. He climbed the steps to his balcony, the pendant warm in his hand, and stood overlooking the land, the sparrow settling beside him on the railing. With a steady breath, he lifted the star shard high, its light flaring bright and pure, a beacon that swept across the valley in waves of silver and gold. The effect was instantaneous and wondrous. The wildflowers bloomed anew, their colors vivid and glowing, the river's song rose clear and strong, and a warmth spread through the earth, waking the valley from its quiet slumber. The people paused in their work, their faces turning upward, and a murmur of awe rippled through them as the light touched every corner of Lirien. Aldric felt it too, a surge of life that flowed from the pendant into him, then outward, binding him to the land as his mother had once promised. The castle stones seemed to sigh, the meadows danced with butterflies, and the air filled with the scent of honey and fresh grass. The sparrow chirped once, then took flight, circling the valley before vanishing into the sky, its silver wings a final gift from the frostwood. Aldric lowered the pendant, cradling it close, and smiled as the people cheered softly below, their voices a gentle chorus of gratitude and joy. The valley was whole again, its magic renewed, and the king stood bathed in the morning light, his heart full, knowing he had kept his promise at last. The day unfolded in peace, the stars giving way to a sun that shone warm and kind, and Lirien slept that night under a sky that twinkled with a quiet, contented glow.